The scent of grilled corn and marinated ribs drifted through the warm Maryland air as I smoothed the picnic table's red-checkered cloth for the third time. The backyard looked perfect, at least from a distance. Hydrangeas bloomed neatly along the fence. Caleb had mowed the grass just the day before, and the string lights overhead were timed to glow once the sun dipped behind the trees. This was the kind of summer day people put on postcards. If anyone had asked, I would have smiled and said how lucky I felt. No one asked. Declan's laughter echoed from the swing set as he chased his sister, Maisie, around the old magnolia tree. Joanne was refilling glasses with lemonade, her voice rising in exaggerated cheer. Caleb stood by the grill, one arm slung around Ainsley's waist like an afterthought. And me? I was right where I always seemed to be, arranging condiments, checking on side dishes, making myself useful. That's what I'd always done. Useful was safe. Useful kept the peace. "Margot, don't bother putting the potato salad out yet," Ainsley called across the yard, her voice slicing through the chatter like a knife disguised in silk. "It'll just sweat and get weird before anyone wants it." I nodded, letting my hands fall away from the bowl I'd just set down. She wasn't wrong, but it wasn't what she said. It was how. The tone, the flicker of condescension in her eyes, as though speaking slowly and clearly would help the elderly comprehend. Caleb didn't look up. He never did. I told myself it didn't matter, that the kids were happy, that family was together, that I should be grateful. But it did matter. The weight in my chest said so. "Looks like rain later," Joanne said beside me, squinting at the sky, though not a single cloud lingered overhead. She offered a distracted smile and poured me a glass of iced tea she knew I didn't want. I said thank you anyway. From the patio, Ainsley's laugh rose again. Sharp, theatrical, drawing eyes and holding them. She was magnetic. I'd give her that. The kind of woman who made others feel inadequate without ever saying a cruel word outright. Her blouse was crisp, her makeup subtle but expensive, her blonde hair coiled into a glossy knot. Everything about her said composed. Perfect, untouchable. I used to think she'd soften. That motherhood would humble her. That time would bring understanding. Instead, she got sharper, and my place in her world got smaller. "Just make yourself comfortable," she'd told me years ago at their housewarming, as if I were a guest instead of Caleb's mother. "We've got everything covered." Translation: Don't interfere. I hadn't. Not really. Not when she decided the kids should call me Margot instead of Grandma. Not when she rearranged my cabinets during her one and only visit, labeling jars and chuckling about my system. Not when she started calling every week to ask if I'd be available, not to see the kids, but to babysit. Every time I looked at Caleb, hoping he'd say something, he'd just give me that smile, tired, polite, helpless. "I think the corn's ready," I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. Behind me, Harlan wandered over from the garden path, a plate in one hand, a puzzled frown on his weathered face. He'd aged, more salt than pepper in his beard now, but his eyes were still sharp, observant. We hadn't spoken much over the years, just the occasional Christmas card or legal advice when my husband passed. "You all right, Em?" he asked in a low voice, careful not to be heard. "Of course," I replied, my practiced smile sliding into place. "Why wouldn't I be?" He studied me for a second longer than was comfortable. Then he nodded and walked away. The first time I met Ainsley, I wanted to like her. She was polished, articulate, driven, the kind of woman I'd been told my son should aim for. Back then, I didn't see the edges. Or maybe I ignored them. Caleb loved her, and I loved him. That was enough. Or it should have been. Ainsley stood beside Caleb now, handing him a plate with exaggerated flourish. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, routine, rehearsed, empty. She smiled for the guests but rolled her eyes as he turned away. Maisie tripped near the porch steps and I moved instinctively, my hands ready to catch her. Ainsley got there first. She knelt and checked the girl's knees, her concern efficient. "You're fine," she said, brushing off invisible dirt. "Don't make a scene." Maisie's face didn't crumple. She simply nodded, adjusting quickly, robotically. I saw it, and it rattled me. I turned away and reached for a dishcloth, pretending to polish a plate that didn't need cleaning. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sizzling grill, it all blurred. This was my family. These were supposed to be the good days. So why did I feel like an outsider on my own lawn? Years ago, I would have said something. Or maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I was always good at swallowing hurt. My own mother had a way of silencing discomfort, teaching me to value peace over honesty, appearance over reality. I carried that legacy into my marriage, into motherhood. I raised Caleb to be polite, composed, accommodating. He learned that lesson well. Joanne returned with a tray of watermelon slices and raised a brow at me. You okay? You've got that look. What look? The one where you're trying not to scream. I laughed, short, dry, tired. I'm fine. She gave me a knowing glance, then turned toward the kids. It's not just you, you know. She's hard on everyone. That doesn't make it better, I replied, then instantly regretted it. But Joanne said nothing more. She just squeezed my hand before drifting off again. The sun dipped lower, casting golden shadows across the patio. Declan ran up to me, breathless, cheeks flushed. Margot, can we have ice cream later? The correction stung, not because he meant harm, but because even at 6, he'd learned to adjust his words to please his mother. Of course, I whispered. Later. He beamed and raced off. Later. Always later. I glanced back at Ainsley. She was talking to another guest now, glass in hand, laughing as she gestured toward the kids. She's just here to babysit, I heard her say. Laughter followed, polite, uncertain, nervous. I froze. I didn't turn around. I didn't confront her. I just stood there, feeling the words lodge somewhere between my heart and throat. She's just here to babysit. As if that was all I was. As if everything I'd done, raising Caleb, caring for these children, keeping this family stitched together, was background noise. I stayed quiet. Again. But something inside me shifted. Quiet didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like surrender. And I was done surrendering. I was refolding napkins that didn't need refolding when Ainsley walked past me, her voice like perfume, pleasant on the surface, choking just beneath. Oh, Margot, you're so detail-oriented, she said, gesturing vaguely to the table setup. It's sweet. You make everything feel like the church potlucks of my childhood. The others chuckled, not quite sure whether to laugh with her or at me. I smiled tightly and placed the napkins back, resisting the urge to ball them in my fists. She had a way of cloaking judgment in compliments. Everything she said was airbrushed in civility, but the poison always seeped through. Later, as I carried out a tray of deviled eggs, she intercepted me with a tisk. Oh no, Margot. We don't serve those anymore, remember? Caleb's cholesterol. You're trying to kill your son with kindness. I froze. It wasn't the words. It was the smile, tight-lipped and practiced, and how Caleb looked down at his shoes instead of correcting her. My hand gripped the edge of the tray a moment too long before I turned and took the eggs back inside. Once alone, I stared at the plate, remembering the last time I'd made those. It was Caleb's 30th birthday. He'd eaten half the platter back then, licking the yolk off his fingers and telling me I still made them better than anyone. Ainsley hadn't touched a single one. Flash. I was back at Christmas dinner 5 years ago. I'd brought my traditional pecan pie, the one Caleb used to beg for as a child. Ainsley had welcomed me at the door, kissed me on the cheek, then handed me a clearly store-bought dessert and said, "We thought we'd try something modern this year, but this can go in the fridge in case someone wants old-school comfort food." Old-school comfort food. Translation: outdated, unwanted, tolerated. Back in the present, I put the eggs in the fridge and wiped my hands on a towel that already bore signs of the day's chores. My back ached, but I pressed through. There was always something else to do. "You're such a trooper, Margot," Ainsley had said once during a baby shower for Maisie after I'd spent 6 hours setting up decorations. "You never complain. It's like you don't even need to be thanked." I had smiled then too, and nodded. That was her gift, to make cruelty feel like a courtesy. At lunch, she took over the conversation as usual. Caleb sat quietly, sipping from a sweating glass. Joanne asked how Declan was doing in school, and before I could answer, Ainsley launched into a monologue about his behavioral therapist and Montessori methods. When Joanne turned to me for a reaction, Ainsley cut in again. "Margot doesn't really get into the new parenting science. She's more traditional." And there it was again. That word, traditional, like a worn-out coat someone was too polite to throw away. I busied myself with collecting empty plates, avoiding everyone's eyes. The kids didn't notice, not yet. But someday they would. After lunch, while the kids played in the sprinkler and adults drifted toward shaded chairs, I wandered into the house for a moment of quiet. I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a small glass of water, and stared out the window. Through the pane, I saw Ainsley with a small group of her friends. They huddled like sorority sisters, clutching stemless wine glasses and tilting their heads toward one another with shared secrets. "She's just here to babysit," Ainsley said, clear as a bell. Laughter erupted. Not cruel, not malicious, just amused, dismissive. I didn't move. The glass in my hand trembled slightly. She had said it again, that phrase, that title she'd claimed for me without consent. Babysitter. It wasn't just a word. It was a boundary. It reduced me, made me a service. Erased the decades of scraped knees, late-night fevers, algebra tutoring, and heartbreak I'd shepherded Caleb through. And he stood beside her, holding her hand. Later that evening, I retreated to my room while the others played board games. My house suddenly felt foreign, its walls echoing with voices I didn't belong to. I opened the drawer of my nightstand, searching for a hand lotion I'd long since run out of, and instead found something else, an old flip phone. It was my husband's. I'd kept it after he died, telling myself I'd eventually transfer the photos or recycle it. But I hadn't. I'd left it, undisturbed. I sat down on the edge of the bed, curiosity pushing me past inertia. The phone powered on with a sputter, battery still holding the last remnants of life. There were 3 unheard voicemails. 2 were old reminders from the pharmacy. 1 was from him. I clicked play. "Margot, it's me. Listen, I know you don't want to hear this, but I've been thinking. Something about Ainsley doesn't sit right with me. She's sharp, too sharp, and the way she talks to you sometimes, like you're not in the room, it's not right. I see things, small things, and I don't like what I see. Just be careful, okay? Trust your gut." The breath in my chest vanished. The message was dated a year before he passed. I had no memory of hearing it. Maybe I'd missed it. Maybe I hadn't wanted to hear it then. But I heard it now. He'd seen it. He'd seen her. And more importantly, he'd seen me. I didn't cry. Not then. There was no room for tears. Just the quiet affirmation that I wasn't imagining things. That this wasn't just about being old-fashioned or oversensitive. It was real. And it had been real for years. I walked back outside with the phone in my pocket, its tiny weight suddenly immense. Ainsley was laughing again, head tossed back, surrounded by admiration. I watched her for a long moment and then turned to the children. Maisie soaking wet and squealing, Declan crouched over a pile of rocks like they held secrets. They deserved better. And maybe, so did I. Tomorrow, I would listen to that message again, and then I'd decide what to do next. The night after the barbecue, I couldn't sleep. The old voicemail replayed in my head, the cadence of his voice stirring dust from long, sealed corners of my mind. It wasn't just what he said about Ainsley. It was that he had seen me. Really seen me. That realization pulled loose a thread I'd spent a lifetime keeping knotted. I wandered into the laundry room under the dim glow of the hallway light. It was the only place that still smelled like him. Pine sol and starch, the scent of pressed shirts and years spent rising early, doing everything before anyone asked. I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the washer, and let my thoughts drift somewhere I usually avoided. My mother's voice was the first to return. "Don't talk back. Don't roll your eyes. Be polite. Sit still." I could have been 6 or 16. It never changed. Her praise was measured, doled out like medicine. Her disapproval came fast and sharp. The house I grew up in wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic or dangerous. It was clean, contained, controlled. Her roses were trimmed weekly. Curtains were changed with the seasons. The white carpet in the den remained untouched by shoes or emotions. If I cried, she'd close the door. If I laughed too loud, she'd wince. I learned early to fold into myself like a paper crane. Decorative, quiet, and neat. At school, other girls wore messy braids and giggled with open mouths. I sat quietly, smoothing my skirt and nodding at teachers. I got A's and didn't ask questions, even when I wanted to. In that house, silence wasn't just golden, it was survival. And when I met Arthur, my husband, I mistook gentleness for rescue. He didn't talk much, but he wasn't cold. He gave me space and hands that didn't push. I loved him the way someone loves sunlight after years indoors, not with hunger, but with disbelief. We built our home together, a tidy 3-bedroom with white shutters and wax-polished floors. I kept it spotless, just like my mother did. I baked casseroles from clipped magazines. I arranged towels by size and color. I put away feelings the same way, stacked and hidden. When Caleb was born, I swore I'd be different, and in some ways I was. I read bedtime stories with funny voices. I kissed his cheeks until he squirmed. I watched cartoons with him and let him pick out mismatched socks. But there was something I didn't know how to unlearn. When he cried too long, I hushed him gently but firmly. When he got angry, I told him not to raise his voice. I confused composure for kindness, discipline for love. I wanted him to be calm, to be good, to be like me. When he met Ainsley, I saw the same steel spine my mother wore, wrapped in designer silk and magazine smiles. She was polite, pleasant, impossible to challenge without feeling impolite yourself. And I welcomed her, not because I didn't see her edge, but because I recognized it. I saw myself in her, or rather, the woman I was told to be. Give her space, Margot. She's finding her rhythm. Don't meddle. It's their life now. She's just strong-willed. All the things people said about my mother, all the things I repeated when I noticed the kids flinch, or when Caleb went quiet mid-sentence, or when I found my own voice drying in my throat. I made excuses for her because I'd spent my life making excuses for the women I'd been told to admire. Women who sacrificed softness for respect. Women who used silence as strategy. Women who told you who you were, then punished you for not fitting the shape. It wasn't until I overheard her that day, "She's just here to babysit," that the dam began to crack. Not because it was the first time she'd reduced me, but because the words echoed too closely to my mother's voice. She's just dramatic. She's just sensitive. She's just old-fashioned. Just, always just. I had spent my life being just enough to be tolerated, never enough to be seen. The laundry room light flickered. I didn't move. Instead, my eyes drifted to the shelves beside me, neatly labeled bins. Light bulbs, sewing, tape, batteries, organized, predictable. My life in plastic containers. And for the first time, it made me feel sick. I pulled a towel from the shelf and buried my face in it. Not to scream, not to speak, but to cry. The kind of cry I hadn't allowed myself since Arthur's funeral. A deep, heaving, ugly cry that came from somewhere beneath the bone. My shoulders shook against the washing machine. My ribs ached. I sobbed for the years I'd lost trying to be pleasing, for the dinners I'd stayed silent through, for the son who didn't know how to stand up for me because I never taught him how, for the grandchildren I could see being shaped by the same cold rules. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who just wanted to dance in the living room without being told to hush, the one who laughed too loud, the one who didn't make everything about usefulness and control. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the air to cool, for the sobs to taper into hiccups, for the old weight in my chest to feel like something newly raw. I looked around the room. The perfectly folded towels, the symmetrical detergent bottles, the neat bins. And for the first time, I didn't feel pride. I felt loss. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a mausoleum, and I had built it. The thought hurt, but it also clarified. If I could build this life, I could rebuild it. Not for Ainsley, not for Caleb, not even for the kids, for me. I stood up slowly, knees stiff, wiping my face with the sleeve of my cardigan. I picked up the voicemail phone from the dryer and clutched it like a talisman. My husband had seen it. Now I did too. Tomorrow I would start writing things down. Tomorrow I would start remembering what it felt like to feel. "Grandma, why are you always in the kitchen by yourself?" Maisie asked the question with the innocence only a child could possess, seated cross-legged on a bar stool, her face streaked with chocolate pudding. I was rinsing out the blender when she said it, the late afternoon sun casting golden beams through the window. I paused, water running over my hands, and turned slowly. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "You're always in here," she said matter-of-factly, swinging her little legs. "Everyone else is talking outside or playing, but you're always doing stuff in here." Her words settled into my chest like stones in a pond. No malice, no accusation. Just observation. Unfiltered. True. I guess I like it here, I replied softly, drying my hands. It's quiet. Maisie tilted her head. You can come outside if you want. I'll sit with you. I smiled, fighting the lump in my throat. Maybe I will. That evening, around the long dining table set for Caleb's birthday, Declan blurted something between mouthfuls of mashed potatoes. Mom, Margot, can I have more? Silence fell like a dropped glass. Caleb looked up, startled. Ainsley's eyes narrowed, and a tiny flicker crossed her face, a micro-expression of restrained offense. Sweetie, she said to Declan, her tone saccharine but clipped. Margot's not your mom. She's your grandma, remember? Mommy is right here. Declan shrunk into his chair, cheeks flushing. I reached for the mashed potatoes and placed another scoop on his plate without a word. Kids mix things up, I said quietly. Ainsley sipped her wine. Sure, but let's not confuse the roles. The rest of the table conversation moved on, but the sting stayed with me. Later that night, I found myself lingering in the children's room, helping them choose pajamas. Maisie pulled me down onto the carpet with her picture book, nestling close as I read about bears and bedtime adventures. Declan watched us from his bed. Do you ever get scared at night? He asked. I looked up. Sometimes, when I was little. What did you do? I'd talk to someone, my sister, my dad, or I'd sing to myself. Declan nodded. Sometimes I tell you things when I'm scared. I reached over and gently touched his hair. I'm glad you do. Flash, the memory came without warning. A winter storm 2 years ago. Caleb and Ainsley stranded during a delayed flight. I'd stayed with the kids for 3 days. On the second night, Declan had woken up crying, and I'd found him curled into a ball, whispering something about shadows. I don't like when she gets mad, he'd said. I didn't press him then, just held him until he fell asleep. I told myself children exaggerated, that it was just a bad dream. But now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, while making pancakes, Maisie came into the kitchen clutching a sheet of printer paper covered in crayon. Want to see our family? She beamed, handing it to me. I studied the drawing. 4 stick figures. Declan, Maisie, Caleb, and me. No Ainsley. I tried to keep my expression neutral. This is lovely, sweetheart. You worked hard on it. I made another one, she whispered. But Mommy got mad, so I had to throw it away. I felt the air shift around me. Why did she get mad? I drew you with wings. She said it was silly. That night, after the kids were asleep, I pulled out a lined journal from the back of my closet. It had been a gift from Arthur on my birthday, one of those leather-bound ones with gilded edges. I'd never written in it. It felt too pretty for grocery lists, too indulgent for nonsense. But now, I needed somewhere to place the things I couldn't say aloud. I wrote slowly, the pen scratching across the paper like a confession. Today, Maisie asked why I'm always in the kitchen alone. Declan called me Mom. Ainsley corrected him like I was a stranger who'd overstayed her welcome. Maisie drew a family picture. Ainsley made her destroy it. The next entry came the following day, then another, and another. Each page was a reclamation, my thoughts unfiltered, my truth unpolished. I began to keep the journal in my apron pocket, jotting things down while washing dishes or folding clothes. It was the first thing that felt entirely mine in years. One afternoon, after tidying up the guest room, I noticed something odd. An air vent near the dresser had a small blinking light inside it. It wasn't visible unless you were directly beneath it. I stepped closer, squinting. It wasn't a vent. It was a camera, small, black, tucked into the slats like a spy. My chest constricted. I moved through the house, methodically checking rooms, the living room, the hallway, the kitchen, all with similar tiny devices tucked behind decor or fixtures, not mine, not Caleb's. I knew whose. I retrieved my old phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. Harlan? My voice trembled. Yes, Margot. I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, is it legal to install surveillance equipment in someone else's home? Without their knowledge? There was a pause. That's a loaded question. Why? I hesitated. Because I think Ainsley's been recording me. Another pause. I'm coming over. He arrived within the hour. I showed him the devices. His expression darkened. She didn't put these here for safety, Margot. These aren't nanny cams, they're spy cams. We stood in silence, the weight of it all pressing down like a thunderstorm on my shoulders. How long? I asked. There's no way to know without accessing the network. But this isn't random. Someone put effort into hiding these. That night, I sat with my journal in my lap, staring at the blank page. She's been watching me, mocking me, reducing me to a caricature. And somehow, worst of all, I wasn't surprised. I remembered her laughter on the patio, the sharp glances exchanged with her friends, the sideways comments. I thought she was just cruel. But this was control. This was obsession. This was war. It took me 3 days to find the nerve. 3 days of rereading my journal entries, of staring at the tiny blinking camera light nestled into the hallway baseboard, of listening to Declan talk in his sleep, and Maisie hum to herself while drawing new pictures she hid under her mattress. 3 days of deciding I was no longer going to pretend nothing was happening. I waited until the kids were outside with Joanne, chasing bubbles across the backyard. Ainsley had gone out for errands. It was just Caleb and me, standing in the kitchen we used to bake Christmas cookies in. I need to talk to you, I said, voice steady. He looked up from his phone, brows knitting slightly. What's up? I gestured to the dining room. Let's sit. He followed, moving slower than usual, like he already sensed the terrain shifting beneath him. I folded my hands in front of me and looked him in the eyes. There are cameras in the house, Caleb. Hidden ones. Not mine. His brow furrowed. What are you talking about? In the air vents, behind picture frames. They're nanny cams, but not for the kids. They're pointed at me. He blinked. You're sure? Yes. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his forehead. Mom, that's a serious accusation. I didn't accuse. I stated a fact, and you know who put them there. He didn't respond. I continued. She's been watching me, recording me, probably laughing about it with her friends. I overheard her at the barbecue. She's just here to babysit. This isn't speculation. This is happening. He let out a breath and nodded slowly, though not in agreement, more like stalling. I think you're reading too much into it. I stiffened. Into cameras hidden in my home? I'm not saying it's okay if it's true, he replied, carefully choosing his words. But maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed. You've been more anxious lately. Don't, I said, voice sharper than intended. Don't turn this into some imagined hysteria. I am not losing my mind, Caleb. He stood, then sat back down, tapping his fingers against his thigh. You've been through a lot this year. He tried again. Dad's anniversary just passed. Maybe. This has nothing to do with grief. This has everything to do with the way your wife treats me, the way you allow it. I don't allow anything, he said, but he still wasn't looking at me. You don't stop it either. He went quiet. I pressed on. The kids come to me. They're afraid to be themselves around her. They whisper things. They notice. Maisie draws me into the family, not her. Kids draw things all the time, he said, deflecting. That doesn't mean anything's wrong. They're telling me something with their silence, I said, just like you are. I think you need to talk to someone, he said finally, softly. A therapist. It might help work through some of this stress. It landed like a slap. You think I'm crazy? No, I think you're struggling. And maybe therapy would help give you some peace. You mean help me stop being inconvenient? His jaw tightened. That's not fair. No, Caleb. What's not fair is being treated like a piece of furniture in my own home. Being laughed at, dismissed, filmed without consent. That's not fair. Silence expanded between us. Then I heard the front door open. Light footsteps. A pause. Ainsley stepped into the frame of the hallway. She looked between us and smiled lightly. Everything okay? Caleb's body language changed instantly. He shifted, lowered his eyes, tucked his shoulders inward like a boy caught between parents. Yeah, he said. Just talking. About what? Nothing important, he answered too quickly. I stood, refusing to shrink. It's fine. We're done. She looked at me with a flicker of something unreadable, suspicion or satisfaction, then turned to Caleb. Can you help me with the groceries? He followed her without a backward glance. I stayed in the dining room, heart pounding, not from rage, but from the slow devastation of watching my son, my only child, retreat behind the wall he didn't even know he'd built. That evening, I told Joanne. She stirred her tea at the porch table, eyes narrowed in concern. Hidden cameras? Yes. And you're sure? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She sighed and set her spoon down. So what are you going to do? I tried talking to Caleb. She winced. And? He thinks I need help. Well, I turned sharply. Don't. I'm just saying, Margot, maybe this is getting blown out of proportion. Maybe she put them in for safety. Then why not tell me? Why hide them? Joanne shrugged, uneasy. People are strange about boundaries these days. She doesn't think I deserve any. Joanne looked at me. Her expression softened but stayed hesitant. Listen, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying I agree, but maybe let it go. For the kids. For your sanity. You keep pushing this and they'll shut you out. They already are. She reached for my hand. You're walking a fine line here, Margot. Don't make things harder than they need to be. That line settled in my chest like a stone. Don't make things harder. How many times had I swallowed that same phrase over the years? When my mother corrected the way I sat, when Arthur's mother gave me unsolicited advice, when Ainsley took over birthday planning without asking, when Caleb forgot my birthday and Ainsley said, he's just overwhelmed. Every time, I'd told myself the same thing. Don't make things harder. But now, I was starting to wonder who it had actually made life easier for. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I didn't want to remember the conversation, the way Caleb's eyes slid away from mine, how quickly he folded when she appeared. Instead, I went to the garden. I pruned the hydrangeas, pulled weeds from the brick path, and talked aloud into the humid night air. I told the flowers about Caleb's eyes when he was a baby. How he used to grip my finger so tightly, it made me believe I was the center of his small world. How he used to say, "Don't go, Mommy," when I left for work. How I used to whisper, "I'll never leave you." How far that promise now felt from reality. The stars blinked faintly through the tree branches. Crickets sang like they had every summer before this one. The familiar smells of soil and jasmine offered the only comfort I could rely on. In the garden, no one watched. No one judged. No one asked me to be smaller, quieter, more manageable. Out there, I could just be. Maisie found me there the next morning. "Are you sad?" she asked. I wiped dirt from my gloves and looked at her. "A little," she nodded. "Do flowers help?" I smiled. "Sometimes." She sat down beside me, cross-legged in the dew-damp grass. For a while, we just watched bees dance across blossoms. And in that silence, I made a new promise. Not to Caleb, not to Joanne, not even to the children, to myself. I wasn't going to let them shrink me anymore. The second family barbecue of the summer looked like a painting. Vivid colors, wide smiles, kids darting barefoot across trimmed grass. The grill hissed and flared with the scent of hickory smoke and buttered corn. Mason jars sweated with lemonade and sweet tea. Paper lanterns swayed in the breeze overhead, casting gentle shadows across linen-covered tables. I stood near the garden gate, arranging cutlery, listening to the click of tongs and the hum of polite conversation. The sun warmed the back of my neck. From a distance, it looked like joy. Closer in, the tension pulsed under every word. Ainsley moved like a hostess born to the role, graceful, loud enough to command attention, perfectly dressed in a coral sundress with crisp pleats. She laughed too loudly, clinked her glass too often. Her voice carried. Caleb stood near the grill with Harlan, their conversation shallow and safe. Sports, weather, real estate. I watched Caleb nod too often, eyes drifting to Ainsley as if waiting for a signal. Maisie tugged at my skirt. "Can I help with the napkins?" I smiled. "Of course, baby. Just fold them like this." She sat cross-legged beside the table, folding blue paper into triangles, humming to herself. In that moment, surrounded by chatter and clatter, she was the only stillness I could touch. Harlan approached a moment later with a plate of grilled shrimp, eyes scanning the scene. "Good turnout," he murmured. I nodded, not looking up. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I lied. "Fine." He didn't press. From across the yard, Ainsley's voice rang out like a gunshot cloaked in silk. "Well, Margot's just here to babysit, right?" she said, gesturing toward me with a chuckle. "Best unpaid help in the state." A wave of polite laughter followed, light, unsure, edged with discomfort. I froze. My hand paused mid-reach toward the serving platter. The world around me didn't stop, but my place in it suddenly shrank. Someone said something about grandmas being the real MVPs, and another joked, "Does she do house calls?" The laughter rose again, but it didn't reach me. I turned my back to the group, pretending to adjust the napkins. My fingers trembled slightly. Caleb said nothing. He didn't look at me. He stayed by the grill, flipping burgers. Declan and Maisie didn't notice. They were too busy racing across the lawn, squealing over a butterfly that had landed on the fence. I stood there, letting the sun burn my shoulders, letting the shame bleed through my spine. Ainsley laughed again, louder this time, performing. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Harlan stepped beside me again, this time more deliberate. His voice was low. "You want to take a walk?" I hesitated, then nodded. We walked the perimeter of the yard, past the hydrangeas, the vegetable boxes Arthur and I had built years ago. I could smell the basil, the rosemary, his herbs. "You shouldn't have to endure that," Harlan said. His tone was calm, but his words were loaded. "It's nothing," I murmured. "She just jokes like that." "No," he said flatly. "That wasn't a joke. That was a message." I swallowed. "It's easier if I don't make a scene. She humiliated you, on purpose, in front of your family." "I've survived worse," I said quietly. "That doesn't mean you should keep surviving." We reached the side gate and paused. The laughter from the yard had drifted away. The sounds of meat sizzling and ice clinking in glasses carried on, oblivious to my unraveling. "I need to get back," I said. Harlan didn't argue. He just reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever decide enough is enough." I took the card. He'd scribbled a line on the back in blue ink. "You have options, and I believe you." He didn't wait for a thank you, just nodded once and disappeared around the hedges. I returned to the table like nothing had happened. I finished setting the spoons. I picked up an empty pitcher and refilled it. I complimented someone's pasta salad. No one said a word about the joke. No one apologized. No one noticed my hands shaking as I poured lemonade. Ainsley breezed past me, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Thanks for topping off the tea, Margot. You really are the MVP." She patted my shoulder, then turned away. That night, after everyone had gone, I cleared dishes alone. Joanne had offered to help, but I waved her off. I needed quiet. I needed space. The kids were asleep. Caleb and Ainsley retreated to the guest room without a word. No acknowledgement, no apology, not even a glance. In the laundry room, I found one of Maisie's drawings on the counter. It was a scene from the backyard. Balloons, sun, smiling stick figures. There I was again, drawn slightly larger next to the kids. Caleb in the corner. Ainsley was missing. I placed it inside my journal. Then I climbed into bed and pulled out the drawer in the nightstand. Inside, nestled between a box of tissues and a half-used lotion bottle, was Arthur's old wristwatch. The one he wore to every court date, every funeral, every major moment. I held it in my palm, the leather strap warm from my hand. The house was silent. Outside, crickets played their song. A sprinkler hissed somewhere down the street. I lay on my side and clutched the watch to my chest. And I cried. Not the way I had in the laundry room, not a storm of grief. This time, it was quieter, heavier, like mourning something still alive. I cried for my son, for who I'd raised him to be, and who he wasn't. I cried for my grandchildren, who didn't yet understand the weight of performance and control. And I cried for myself, for being polite when I should have been angry, for being accommodating when I should have been protective, for being quiet for far too long. I cried until my pillow dampened, until my body curled into itself, until sleep eventually came. It began with a whisper, not a roar. After the barbecue, after the sting of laughter and Caleb's vacant silence, I stood in the hallway and stared at the blinking light of a hidden camera tucked beneath the molding. I didn't touch it. I didn't scream. I simply stared. And then I walked to the kitchen, pulled out a yellow sticky note, and wrote, "You are not a ghost." I placed it on the inside of the spice cabinet, behind the cinnamon. The next morning, I wrote another, "Your story is not over." That one went beneath the bathroom mirror. Then another, "You don't need permission to fight." They began populating the house like breadcrumbs for a woman I had once been and was slowly remembering. I called them my reminders, but they were more than that. They were rescue lines. Next came the journal. It was a leather-bound notebook Arthur had gifted me on our anniversary, back when he was still around and trying to convince me to write more than shopping lists. I opened it for the first time in years. The pages were blank. I filled the first with a confession, July 19th. She made a joke again, called me the help, in front of my son, in front of everyone. I smiled like I always do, but I'm not smiling anymore. I didn't stop. I documented it all, not just the recent humiliations, but the slow erosion that had come before. I printed out texts Ainsley had sent, ones that seemed innocent at first, until they stacked against each other like bricks in a wall. No need to worry about snacks. I've got it covered. Just stay in the background and let us handle it. The kids are adjusting to boundaries, so maybe don't distract them too much. I recorded voice memos from the children, tiny snippets while we baked cookies or worked in the garden. Moments when they said things too fragile for adults to notice. I don't like when Mommy gets mad. She says Grandma's too emotional. I feel better when we're with you. Each one left me breathless. Each one went into a folder labeled Witness. In the evenings, I pulled out old photographs. Caleb as a boy, Arthur in his lawyer's robes, my mother in stiff dresses beside a silent man. I traced the faces with my fingers, trying to understand the legacy I had carried forward and what parts I had the power to break. One photo stopped me cold. Arthur and I at his office party. I was in a navy dress, pearls around my neck, smiling at something just out of frame. He had one arm around me, but what caught my eye wasn't the pose, it was his eyes, fixed on me, focused, seeing. He always saw me. I could still hear his voice, calm and unwavering. She's too controlled, Margot. There's something cold there. I don't like the way she treats you. Just promise me if it ever gets worse, you won't wait for someone else to step in. He said it after Caleb's engagement dinner. I hadn't listened. Now I would. It took 3 weeks to prepare the envelope. Journal entries, screenshots, annotated summaries of specific incidents with dates and locations, testimonies whispered in crayon and colored pencil from Maisie and Declan, photos of the hidden cameras. I even included a list of Post-it notes and where I'd placed them, each one proof of the mental fortress I was slowly building. Then I made the call. Harlan, can I come by? He didn't hesitate. Today? Yes. It was a warm afternoon when I walked into his office, small, wood-paneled, quiet. He poured me coffee without asking how I took it. He already knew. You sure you're ready? He asked, folding his hands across his desk. I nodded and handed over the envelope. He opened it, sifting through pages in silence. His eyes moved quickly but carefully, pausing at notes, at sketches, at printed text with annotations in my handwriting. When he was done, he closed the folder and leaned back. This is a lot, Margot. You've been thorough. I had to be, I said. No one believes you until you give them evidence, and even then, they call you bitter. He didn't argue. I don't want to destroy their marriage. I don't want a war, I continued. But the children, they're absorbing it. And I've absorbed enough for a lifetime. He nodded. Have you considered what might happen if we pursue custody? I have, I said. And I'm not afraid of losing them anymore. I'm afraid of what staying silent is teaching them. He took a deep breath. We can file for temporary guardianship. The grounds would be emotional neglect, instability, environmental coercion, but we'll need corroboration. They've already given it, I said. They just didn't know they were giving it. He pushed the folder gently aside. Are you ready to put your name on this? To be the one who says, this stops now? I didn't blink. I am. He nodded. Then let's begin. When I left, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the courthouse steps. I stood there for a moment, feeling the warmth against my skin, feeling the clarity settle in my bones. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't making it up. I wasn't hysterical or bitter or stuck in the past. I was awake. That night, I rewrote every Post-it. I made them bolder, larger. I added new ones. Protect them, reclaim your name, you are not a spectator. I placed one on the front door, right where my hand would land as I turned the knob to leave. It read, You are the storm now. Caleb came to the house unannounced. I was pruning the rose bushes along the front porch when I saw his car slow to a stop. The gravel crunched beneath his tires. He stepped out, slamming the door harder than necessary. His face was tight, his posture stiff, He didn't greet me, just stood at the foot of the steps and said, "We need to talk." I wiped my hands on my apron. Inside. We sat in the dining room. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't want to pretend. "I spoke to Harlan," he said, eyes fixed on the table. "He told me you filed for guardianship." "I've consulted him. That's true." "Guardianship?" he repeated, louder this time. "Of my children?" I met his gaze. "Of my grandchildren. Yes." His hands balled into fists on the tabletop. "You're trying to steal them from us." "No, Caleb. I'm trying to save them from the environment you refuse to see." His voice rose. "You don't get to decide what kind of parents we are. That's not your place." "Then who protects them when you're too afraid to speak up?" I asked calmly. He stood, pacing now. "You're blowing things out of proportion. Ainsley has been emotionally abusive for years. You've watched her strip me down piece by piece, and you did nothing. She's firm. She's structured. That's not abuse. She mocks me, isolates me, gaslights your children into silence, and watches me with hidden cameras." He flinched. "I didn't know about the cameras." "But you knew about everything else, and you let it happen." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. "This is insane. You're destroying this family." I stood, my voice trembling but firm. "I raised you to be strong, and you became spineless." He stopped moving. His face froze. "You've let her mold you into someone I don't recognize. I begged for your support. I gave you every opportunity to see the truth. And you stood there, watching me drown, because it was easier to keep the peace." "She's my wife," he said, quieter now. "And I'm your mother." His shoulders sagged. I stepped forward. "I loved you before you had a name. I sat up with you every night you had nightmares. I walked into that delivery room thinking nothing would ever compare to hearing you cry for the first time. But now, I don't even know who I'm talking to." He sank into a chair, face in his hands. Silence stretched. I softened. Just enough. "Caleb, this isn't about revenge. This isn't about control. I would give anything to not be doing this, but I can't let Maisie and Declan grow up thinking love means control and silence." He looked up, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something: guilt, recognition, fear. Then the front door opened. Ainsley stepped in, designer sunglasses perched on her head, phone in hand. She took one look at us and said, "What's going on?" Caleb stood immediately, falling into step beside her. "She's going after the kids." Her lips curled. "Of course she is." "You knew about the cameras," I said. "Don't pretend." She didn't blink. "I don't need to pretend. They were for safety. You installed them in my walls." "It's our property," she replied coolly. "You live on our land." I stared at her. "So I'm a tenant now? A guest in my own life?" "You crossed a line," she said. "There will be consequences." Caleb looked away. "I'm filing for a restraining order," she continued. "Effective immediately. You'll have no contact with the children unless supervised." "You'd punish them for loving me?" "I'm protecting them from manipulation." "They came to me," I said. "I never asked. They came to me." She turned to Caleb. "Let's go." He followed. I watched them leave, the front door clicking shut behind them like the final note of a funeral. 3 hours later, Joanne arrived. She looked pale, anxious, her cardigan clutched tight over her chest. "I just talked to Caleb," she said. "What the hell are you doing, Margot?" "What I should have done a long time ago." "You're tearing them apart." "They were already falling apart." "Don't make yourself the victim," she snapped. "You've always needed to be the center." My jaw tightened. I didn't want to be the center. I wanted to be respected. "You're overreacting. Ainsley's not perfect, but she's not a monster. She's controlling, manipulative, and calculated. That may not leave bruises, but it leaves damage." Joanne sat heavily in a chair. "You're turning everyone against you." "Number, I'm finally standing for myself. If that costs me your approval, so be it." She didn't respond, just stared at the floor, lost in thought. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't speak to anyone. I went upstairs, pulled the shades down, and sat in the dark with my journal in my lap. The silence was deafening. I opened the drawer of my nightstand to put the journal away and found a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages of Maisie's favorite storybook. It was a drawing, stick figures beneath a crooked sun, 2 children, one taller woman with white hair, a house. Above it, written in crayon, Please don't leave me. My heart cracked clean down the center. Maisie had drawn it. She'd snuck it in quietly, without fanfare, without anyone knowing. Just like me, all those years ago, writing secret notes in the back of notebooks, afraid to speak the truth too loud. I touched the paper gently and pressed it against my chest. No matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. And that was enough to keep going. The conference room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of paper. I sat across from the family mediator, Harlan beside me, a stack of files and printed screenshots laid neatly between us. My palms were dry, my voice steady. I've documented everything, I began, not waiting for permission. Every instance, every word. The mediator, a composed woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a clinical tone, nodded as she flipped through the first few pages. Harlan leaned forward. This is not a case of bitterness or misunderstanding. It's about patterns. Margot has gathered texts, hidden camera evidence, corroborating child statements, and years of behavioral observation. She's not speculating. She's witnessing. The mediator tapped a highlighted paragraph with her pen. The children, are they aware this is happening? They're not just aware, I said. They're living in it. 2 days later, the interviews began. Maisie went in first, her pink sneakers swinging from the edge of the couch in the children's interview room. I wasn't allowed to sit with her, but I watched from the small observation window, heart in my throat. She clutched the corner of a drawing as the therapist gently asked about her home life. My mommy gets loud a lot, she said softly. Sometimes Declan hides in the closet. The therapist asked more questions, guiding, not leading. She says Grandma makes things harder, but I like Grandma. Declan's session was shorter, more to the point. When asked how he feels when he's home with his parents, he shrugged. Maisie cries a lot. What about you? I don't cry, I just pretend I'm not there. And when you're with your grandmother, she listens. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and reread every word of my journal. By morning, Harlan had filed the emergency petition for temporary guardianship. The court date was set for a week later. It rained that morning, hard. I wore a navy blazer and flats. Harlan drove. In the passenger seat, I clutched my file folder like a shield. The courthouse was quiet, clinical. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Caleb and Ainsley stood across the waiting area, both dressed in black. Caleb wouldn't meet my eyes. Ainsley wore red lipstick like armor. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thin. The judge, an older man with wire-frame glasses and a measured demeanor, listened as both attorneys laid out their sides. Harlan spoke first. He presented the journal, the texts, the camera footage timestamps. He laid out a printed transcript of the group chat, lines of Ainsley's laughter shared with her friends at my expense. She's folding laundry again. Might as well charge her rent. Babysitter Margot strikes again. At least she's useful for once. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Harlan read the messages aloud. Ainsley shifted in her seat, arms crossed tightly. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Then came the audio clips, Declan whispering, "She yells when Dad isn't home." Maisie softly saying, "She says not to tell Grandma stuff because she'll cry." Silence. Caleb was called to the stand. His voice cracked as he tried to defend Ainsley. "She's strict, not abusive." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Reynolds, the term strict loses merit when fear is involved. Did you know about the cameras?" "No," Caleb admitted, staring down at his lap. "And the chat?" His lips pressed together. "I didn't know, but I should have." Harlan handed over the group chat's timeline. He was added to the chat. He received every message. Caleb's face crumbled. "I didn't read them," he said, almost inaudibly. "I ignored it." "And by ignoring it," Harlan said gently, "you allowed it." The judge nodded slowly. "That will be noted." Ainsley took the stand last. She was poised, cold, smiling too tightly. "Do you believe Margot is a danger to your children?" "She's emotionally unstable. Obsessive." The judge held up a highlighted message from her group chat. "Maybe I'll set a trap. Move the mugs again and watch her freak out." "Explain this," he said. Ainsley blinked. It was a joke. "Your jokes," he replied, "come at the expense of a woman who helped raise your children. They aren't funny. They're disturbing." She opened her mouth to retort, then stopped. The courtroom was still. Caleb wouldn't meet her eyes. The judge folded his hands. I've reviewed the evidence, heard the testimonies, and evaluated the risk factors. Effective immediately, Margot Reynolds is granted temporary guardianship of Maisie and Declan Reynolds. Visitation from the biological parents is to be supervised pending further evaluation. Ainsley gasped. You can't be serious. The judge remained impassive. I am. She stood up sharply. You're all falling for her victim act. She's manipulative. She's always wanted to take control. Caleb tried to touch her arm. Ainsley. She jerked away. Don't touch me. The bailiff stepped forward. The judge gave a quiet signal. Court was dismissed. I sat there stunned, watching Ainsley storm from the room. Caleb lingered, then walked past me. He paused, just briefly. I didn't mean for it to get this far. You didn't mean for anything, I said. That's the problem. He nodded, then left. Outside, the rain had stopped. I stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, the folder still clutched in my hand, the clouds parting just enough for light to break through. I wasn't vindicated. Not fully. The road ahead would be long. But I was no longer voiceless, and the truth finally had a name. The judge's ruling had been final, temporary custody to me, effective immediately. Ainsley was ordered to begin individual counseling and parenting classes within 30 days. Caleb was granted twice-weekly supervised visitation. There were no goodbyes that day, only a lingering tension in the courthouse hallway and the sound of Declan clutching my hand a little tighter. The children moved in that same evening. I'd prepared their rooms quietly, unsure whether hope was a luxury I could afford. Maisie's space had pale blue sheets and a new bookshelf I found at a secondhand store. Declan's room was filled with old Legos Arthur had kept in the garage, cleaned and sorted in neat bins. They didn't need time to adjust. They arrived with backpacks, quiet but calm, and walked through the front door like they were stepping out of the storm and into dry clothes. That night, after a quiet dinner, we curled up on the living room couch. Maisie rested against my shoulder, thumb in her mouth, hair still damp from her bath. Declan sat on the floor with a sketchpad on his knees. Grandma, he said after a long silence, it feels like we can breathe here. The words hit like sunlight through storm clouds. I didn't cry, not right then, but something inside me softened so completely, I felt my own breath slow. The next morning, I made pancakes. Real ones, with butter and maple syrup, not the sugar-free, gluten-free substitutes Ainsley used. Maisie clapped her hands. Declan had seconds. We laughed, we spilled milk, we stayed in pajamas until noon. And just like that, the house began to change. The walls, once covered in antique plates and dried floral wreaths, were slowly overtaken by drawings and crayon murals. Maisie taped up her family portraits without asking. Declan created a sign for the bathroom that read, "Private, Dragons Only," in block letters. I left it up. The hallway that used to smell of lavender polish now smelled of Play-Doh and peanut butter. The couch had cookie crumbs. The kitchen had smudges on the fridge. My pristine sanctuary had finally become a home. At night, while they slept, I sat in the sunroom with my journal and finally did more than record pain. I wrote stories, little vignettes, moments from childhood, imaginings of who I might have been if I'd found my voice sooner. There was something liberating in writing without an audience, without permission. Then I found the flyer. It was tucked between gas bills and coupons in the mail. Writing from the Bones, a community memoir course for women reclaiming their voice. I called the same day and signed up. Every Wednesday evening, I sat in a circle of women who were strangers at first, then not. We shared pages. We cried over passages. We learned the power of revising not just words, but the meaning beneath them. I read aloud from my journal for the first time. I was not just a babysitter. I was the one who knew which mug Caleb drank from when he was sick, which lullaby Declan needed to hear twice, how Maisie hated tags on her shirts. I was the one who stayed. They applauded, not with pity, but with knowing. At home, Maisie took to reading too. She curled beside me at the kitchen table each afternoon, stumbling through pages of picture books while sunlight spilled across the worn wood. I helped her sound out the words. She asked questions. We underlined our favorites. I want to write stories like you, she said one day. I kissed her forehead. You already do. You just use pictures instead of paragraphs. Declan found comfort in the garden. He asked about the herbs, the soil. We planted basil and thyme together. I let him name the plants. He chose names like Captain Mint and Queen Rosemary. I didn't correct him. The house no longer echoed with waiting. It pulsed with life. Then one evening the phone rang. It was Joanne. Her voice cracked on the second word. Margot. I hadn't spoken to her since the day she told me I was overreacting. I waited. I was wrong, she said, barely audible. I was so wrong. I said nothing. I saw the chat transcripts. Caleb showed me. And Ainsley. She's done the same to me, in smaller ways, for years. My breath caught. She told me I was a burden, said I wasn't needed anymore, said I should stop trying to parent my niece's kids like they were mine, made fun of my clothes, my weight, and I thought, maybe I deserved it. She broke down then. Not loud, not messy, just broken. I don't want to stay in that house anymore, she whispered. Can I come stay with you for a while? I looked around the room, at Maisie drawing at the coffee table, at Declan petting the dog, at the storybook open beside my notebook. Yes, I said. Come home. The letter began with his name. Arthur, I should have written this years ago. I sat at the desk in the sunroom, the one that overlooked the lilac bushes we planted together in our second spring in the house. The late afternoon light streaked across the page as I wrote, not just to remember, but to release. You always saw what I couldn't name. You warned me in ways I wasn't ready to hear. You tried to give me the courage I hadn't yet earned. I want you to know, I'm listening now. The letter became a voiceover in my mind, the cadence of truth long overdue. I used to think silence was my duty. That being agreeable made me worthy. That strength meant swallowing pain and smiling through the burn. I thought if I stayed small enough, they'd have no reason to hurt me. I didn't know that staying small gave them permission to forget I was even there. I paused to wipe a tear from the edge of the paper before it smudged the ink. You asked me once not to shrink. I didn't listen then. But I hear you now, and I'm standing. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it inside the back of my new manuscript. The title, handwritten across the top of the first page, read, Invisible Until I Spoke. It wasn't a memoir for the world, not yet. It was for me, for Maisie, when she grew old enough to ask questions, for Declan, when he looked back and wondered how his childhood was salvaged, for Caleb, if he ever found the courage to face the things he couldn't bear to see. I wrote in the early mornings, before the children stirred, when the world was quiet and honest. Some days I chronicled the humiliations, sharpened words, passive dismissals, the ache of being erased. Other days I wrote about the moments that saved me, Maisie's drawings, Declan's quiet resilience, the post-it notes that slowly built a new truth. The manuscript grew quickly, not because the story was easy, but because I'd carried it for decades. All I had to do now was let it breathe. It had been nearly 2 months since the court ruling when Caleb's letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, addressed in his slanted handwriting. I held it for a moment before opening it. My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it. But I want you to know that I read your journal. Not the whole thing. Just what you left open on the table the day I came for the kids' bags. It made me realize how much I didn't see, or refused to see. I let Ainsley's version of truth become mine. And I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, for what I didn't do, for every time I looked away, for every time I didn't speak when I should have, for the fact that my children learned more about kindness from you than they ever did from us. I'm in counseling now. I'm trying to understand why I stayed quiet. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want to earn back what I broke. If you ever decide to speak to me again, I'll be here. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. I placed the letter beside the manuscript and closed the cover gently. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of a shaded cemetery plot in Pennsylvania. My mother's grave was simple, just her name and dates. No epigraph, no sentiment. I hadn't visited in years. I carried a single white rose and a folded piece of my manuscript, the opening page, the letter to Arthur. I knelt beside her headstone, resting the rose at its base. I don't know if you ever loved me the way I needed, I said aloud, but I've stopped waiting for that answer. The breeze stirred. I forgive you, not because you asked, but because I need to let it go. I placed the folded page under the rose and stood. I didn't linger. I didn't cry. I walked away without turning back. The next day, Harlan called. There's a community event happening next month, he said. A forum on covert emotional abuse and family silence. They're asking survivors to speak. I thought of you. My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't a speaker, I was a listener, a watcher, a writer. But the manuscript sat on the table beside me, waiting to be more than a private confession. I'll do it, I said. The forum was held in a modest auditorium at the local library. The chairs were folding. The microphone squeaked once before settling. There were about 40 people, women with lined faces, young men with closed-off eyes, a few teenagers scribbling notes. I stepped onto the stage and unfolded my paper. I was a mother, a wife, a grandmother, and for a long time I was invisible. I paused, took a breath. I believed being agreeable made me valuable. I let kindness be my cage. I was taught silence as survival, and I passed it on without knowing. Heads nodded. A woman in the back dabbed at her eyes. But then my granddaughter wrote me a note that said, "Please don't leave me." And I realized I wasn't invisible. I was their last hope. I read excerpts from my manuscript. I shared the post-it notes. I told them how standing for myself didn't mean tearing anyone down. It meant building something new where something broken used to be. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a ripple of applause. Then tears. Later, a teenage girl approached me with shaking hands. "Your story sounds like my mom," she said. "She never talks about it, but I think she needs to hear this." I gave her a copy of the opening pages. "Start here." As she left, I turned back toward the stage. My voice had always been quiet, but now it was heard, and it would echo. The backyard smelled of fresh-cut grass and grilled peaches. String lights crisscrossed above, glowing gently against the twilight sky. A small group of neighbors sat at the long table draped in a linen cloth, laughter soft and genuine as paper lanterns floated in the warm June air. Margot stood near the garden beds, trowel abandoned on the soil, her hands speckled with ink from a morning spent editing. Maisie danced barefoot across the stone path, spinning with Declan to music humming from the porch radio. Joanne carried a tray of lemonade to the table, her eyes brighter than they'd been in years. Even Caleb was there. He sat quietly at the edge of the group, not commanding attention, not trying to disappear. He looked older, just slightly. Not from age, but from awareness. And when he caught Margot's glance across the yard, he nodded. Small, sincere. The space between them had not closed completely, but it no longer felt like a canyon. Margot turned back to the grill, flipping corn and brushing it with herb butter that Declan had mixed himself. She wore an apron with little handprints painted on the pockets. Maisie's idea. Her journal sat open on the patio table beside her, its corners curled from sun. Laughter erupted from the kids near the garden, where they'd invented a game involving chalk, worms, and a makeshift dragon cave built from overturned planters. No one told them to quiet down. No one hushed their joy. Inside, the living room had been transformed since the day the children arrived. The mantel, once lined with porcelain and muted tones, now held scribbled pictures, index cards with new vocabulary words, and a painted wood block that read, "Home is who listens." The coffee table bore traces of marker and glitter glue. The walls no longer whispered silence. They buzzed with life. As dusk deepened, guests began drifting home. Joanne hugged Margot tight, her voice low. "Thank you. For everything. For not turning me away." "You turned back on your own," Margot replied. "That's all that matters." Caleb approached slowly, hands in his pockets. Maisie clung to his leg briefly before darting off again. "I like tonight," he said. Margot didn't offer him absolution. She simply nodded. "It was good. I'm still working on everything." "I know." He glanced toward the table where her journal lay open, then back to her. "Can I read it? Someday?" Her voice was quiet but certain. "If you're ready to hear all of it." He nodded once, turned, and walked toward Declan, who handed him a plastic sword and declared him Knight of the Back Fence. Margot chuckled, shaking her head. wiping ink from her fingers on a dish rag. She sat on the edge of the porch steps as the last guests left. The breeze carried traces of honeysuckle and distant laughter. Maisie climbed into her lap without a word, curling close. Declan dropped beside them and leaned into her arm. They sat like that for a while, watching stars slowly puncture the darkening sky. And in the quiet, Margot's voice emerged, not aloud, but within, strong and clear. Margot. I used to think family was a bloodline, something unbreakable, something owed. But I've learned that family isn't inherited, it's chosen. Sometimes it's who stays when everything else crumbles. Sometimes it's who fights for you when no one else will. And sometimes it's who you fight to become, for them. A car passed slowly on the distant road, its headlights casting gentle halos through the tree line. Sometimes family is what you fight for, not who you're born to. The back door creaked open behind her, Joanne calling softly, "Tea's ready if you want." Margot smiled. "Be there in a minute." She stood, lifting Maisie gently, who giggled and ran ahead. Declan followed, waving goodnight to the fireflies. Margot paused just inside the door, glancing once more at the backyard, the lights, the laughter that lingered in the grass, the quiet grace of a life reclaimed. She walked to the journal on the table. She ran her hand along its spine. Then she closed it softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not just here to babysit anymore." And for the first time in years, she meant every word. If this story cracked something open in you, you're not alone. Every silent room, every unspoken truth, it's time we name them. Stick with us for more real stories where strength wears wrinkles and justice whispers before it roars. Because sometimes the loudest revolutions begin with a woman finally saying, "Enough."